Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Vance. Thanks for joining me today for our webinar. A little bit of a change today. I just have the full screen of the PowerPoint that I'm going to go through and no video of me. And so you guys all might see a little bit of a different interface on your side. But thank you again for joining me. It's Tuesday, March 24th. Actually, what we're going to cover today, Raymond James has done a really good job over the last few weeks of putting out some really good content. And so what I did is I listened to their webinar yesterday, and we're going to go through some of the highlights of that. And I think it'll prove to be invaluable. Additionally, if we need to, if you'd like to watch the whole thing yourself, we'll give you full access to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pop out to that presentation. It is about 26 slides. Actually, it was a little longer. I think I cut it down. So it's about 30-some slides. And this was their presentation. So I would really encourage you, if you really want to get into the weeds, if you think some of this information would be even more helpful from a personal perspective to potentially calm some of the fears that are going on, with either business or with family dynamics, I would really encourage you to listen to this because there were 3 experts involved. One of them was Larry Adam, who's our Chief Investment Officer at Raymond James, as well as we had a healthcare policy analyst and a Washington policy analyst. So 3 really great minds, a lot of good content. I certainly can't do justice like they can, but what I'm going to kind of do today is give you a little bit of the Cliff Notes version, kind of share some of the important highlights. My goal is to be wrapped up in about 20 minutes, and then if you'd like to listen to their full kind of presentation on this content in their voice, that is about 50 minutes. And again, we will, when we get our replay of this webinar live, I'll make sure that we also include the full replay of the Raymond James webinar. So what you will notice, and I hope this is not distracting, is that there's going to be some pages that I'm literally going to click on and move on from because there's a lot of content here, and I want to cover some of the high-level items. So, right now in the coronavirus update, what's been going on is unexpected, unprecedented, unchartered, unfinished, and at times unbearable. I guess we are speaking on a day where the stock market had a really good day. It was a bounce back, obviously, from some of these lows. It's definitely, I guess, kind of maybe calmed some nerves this evening, but certainly we have a pretty big hole to dig out of just in terms of what's been happening on Wall Street. The Dow finished up at over, I think, 11%, the largest percentage move ever, the largest percentage move since 1933. So obviously a big jump. And that was on the heels of, hopefully getting some sort of stimulus in place, which as of now has not passed. But I'll go through that in a little bit. So what you will find as I kind of make my way through this, there's going to be some slides that I'm going to stick on for a while and some that I'm going to move through pretty fast. And so through it all, markets tend to be pretty resilient. What this slide shows is that going back to 1928, average annualized return for the markets is 8.7%. So pretty healthy. The markets have weathered storms before, going back to kind of pre-Great Depression environment. So a couple things, we've all been hearing about the curve. I don't think you can escape the curve, learning about the curve. Nobody probably wants to have this much information about how the curve works. But here's the reality. And so we, here in Santa Clarita or in California, we know that we're on, I don't think we're on full lockdown, but obviously stay at home, and so what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is confirmed cases of the COVID-19. And what we have circled here in this dotted line shows where the United States is going. And so this information is obviously changing rapidly. And so the big concern in a lot of the larger states like California and New York was that we were on this pace that Italy was on, and we were really concerned about, obviously, the impact on the hospitals. And so it appears to us that this chart is going to continue in the wrong direction for some time. Obviously, in our world right now, we're talking about day by day. But I think that the one thing that we all know is the importance of social distancing, why this is a protective measure that really matters, and it's really trying to not overwhelm the healthcare system. And so this is something we're trying to combat pretty actively. We're not on full lockdown here in the U.S., and I'd say yet. I don't know if that will occur, but it potentially might. This is a slide I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but it does show on the right-hand side here, U.S. states in lockdown. So California, New York, some of the larger states, more heavily, densely populated, are handling that. And so what I do want to go through is the healthcare policy expert from Raymond James, Chris Meekins, went through and really just made kind of a compelling case that I thought was relevant. And so from a Raymond James perspective, from their perspective, was that that we continue to believe this will get worse before it gets better. And when he's mentioning that specifically, and what this slide is dealing with, is more from a health perspective, not necessarily a stock market perspective. And so a lot of this is a little bit more focused on the health side of things, and then we'll get into some of the policy and what we think that the impacts on the markets might be. But right now there's a lot of panic that's going on. So to reduce the threat, individuals, we all need to kind of feel like, hey, if I'm not feeling well, I can get a test. And up until a few days ago, it was pretty hard to get a test unless you were exposed to, you kind of met certain criteria. So that's starting to ease up here a little bit. Obviously, we'd also like to know, is there a treatment if I do get sick? And that's something that we don't have at this point. And so it's creating a lot of fear. And then on top of that, obviously, with the financial markets and a lot of retail and restaurants being closed, that's creating a lot of concerns. And so what I do want to go through is this whole idea on what we're dealing with shelter in place and kind of the outlook from our healthcare perspective. And so if you see here on the screen, about halfway down, it says 4 scenarios. So we're going to talk about these 4 scenarios. And our policy expert at Raymond James thinks the eventually we get it scenario is the most likely, but potentially saved by summer is second. So I'll go through that here on the next few slides. There are things that are happening at the government level. Here in California, we're seeing that, we're estimating that, pretty heavy portion of our population might be infected. And I think that is causing concern. And I think the big issue that we're all kind of dealing with is medical preparedness, is that, do we have the capacity to actually handle a spike in cases? And because we know that if the spike's too fast, that we're going to have, there's going to be a big strain on our hospitals, on our medical professionals. And then the last thing that I know we're all kind of hearing is warm weather is going to be something that will likely slow the spread. I don't think we know that for certain, but that seems to be kind of the conventional thought process. So, and again, we're going to make this slideshow available, the full slide deck, as well as you'll be able to see the Raymond James version. So I'm not going to read through each of these. I would like to be able to make it through this and not bore you. So I'm going to go through kind of scenario 2, which is eventually we'll get it. So one of the things is that we're starting to see is that individual states, individual cities are, even though they've been dragging their feet, I think as Americans, we generally don't want to be shut down. We're not a society that's used to being shut down. So we're in a position where we're basically starting to see, unfortunately, the death rate are going up across the board. I think that it's also now starting to hit close to home, where the public, meaning us, we're starting to accept that action is necessary. And I think a lot of people are now starting to realize, okay, I need to stay at home. I need to make sure I contain myself. And so based on this, eventually we get it, which is kind of the path we're on right now, is that, the infections stay below 1 million, that we're going to turn the corner by Memorial Day, which is, almost the end of May. And, that's really kind of the eventually we get it scenario, which Raymond James is projecting that's a 45% probability. So that's on the higher end of the probability. The scenario 3, which is saved by summer, is that we don't take this seriously enough. We don't really appreciate the threat. We fail to take meaningful action, really across the country, and that the virus continues to spread and continues to potentially double every week. And then, we're going to have a lot more infections. And then by the summer, by the time we get, where we actually start getting a little bit more serious, where we might have to go through full lockdown a little bit later. And that means that we might turn the corner by July 4th. So one of the interesting things I know, as we started this process, all of us had a collective sigh around, all right, this is going to last a month, or my kids are going to be out of school for a month. And it's clear to us that this is going to go longer than that from a health perspective, to make sure that, this doesn't get worse before it gets better. And so So that seems to be some of the high probability scenarios. Again, nobody knows, so I'm just trying to provide some of this information to give you a sense of, what we're seeing from medical experts, because if you're like me, you're probably really tired of turning on the news, because the news, unfortunately, is, I think, full of misinformation. So hopefully this analysis is a little bit more helpful and a little bit more enlightening. This is a little bit of a noisy chart. It's something that I like looking at because I understand all the dynamics of this, so I'm going to do this pretty quickly. But I know if you listen to the full webinar, you'll be able to get even into the weeds a little bit more. So what we're looking at here at the top is the scope of policy actions to date, meaning what's actually happened. Monetary is what the Federal Reserve controls, fiscal is what our government, and then you have corporate and medical, and then societal response. And so the E on these charts would be empty, and the F would be full. So is our tank empty? Is the tank full? So what has been clear is right out of the gate, the Federal Reserve, from a monetary perspective, has pretty much emptied the tank. They have thrown everything at this. They cut interest rates to zero. They, as of today, decided they basically would have unlimited buying of bonds. So basically unlimited purchases, unlimited of capital into the market. And so that obviously has created an environment where people are gaining some confidence, the banks are gaining confidence because the Federal Reserve is doing what they can. But if you do notice from the other three areas, the response has been a little bit mixed and not very immediate. So if you look at fiscal policy, this is what we're seeing Democrats and Republicans fight over right now in the House and the Senate. And you can see down at the bottom the tools used. We have put some phased policies in place. They've been pretty minor. The one they're trying to pass right now is phase 3, which is looking at over $1 trillion of relief. And on a couple slides later, we'll go through that. Corporate and medical responses. Obviously, if you start thinking about what we need right now is taking an approach where we need quick testing, we need full-scale testing. Obviously, a vaccine would be amazing, but that's on the horizon down the road. And then abundance of masks, beds, sanitizer, and ventilators. And so these are all things that we can't get access to right now, or at least we can't on a mass scale. And then societal response. These are the things we're dealing with right now: shelter in home, full lockdown. These are things that shelter in home, we're having that here in California. That's not nationwide. Full lockdown has not occurred. I hope it doesn't. That frightens me a little bit. I think it would be unnerving. But hopefully, if you are sheltered at home, you guys are creating good routines, good habits. I just set up a gym at my house just to kind of deal with realizing I need to exercise, I need to do something. I got out for a run today, so I'm trying to do what I can to stay mentally strong so that I can come to work and function. And while I am coming to work, we have a work environment where we are a necessary industry. We still need to make sure we're advising clients, and so these are things that are still available from a societal perspective. We're starting to do what we can, but there's still more likely on the horizon. All right, so the title of this is Global Synchronized Monetary Easing Response. So basically what that means is that what are the different agencies around the world doing? And essentially what this chart shows is that over 80% of central banks around the globe have eased, meaning they've made money cheaper, they've made it easier to get, and then the average policy rate is at record lows at just below zero. So we hadn't seen it below zero. These are record lows that we had ever seen. One of the things that, I'm going to skip this one. These two get a little bit noisy. So the one thing that becomes clear, I did an economic and market update workshop in January for all clients, and we talked about was a recession on the horizon, and it clearly at the time was not. This is obviously what would be called like a black swan event, something we did not see coming. It is clear we're going to have a major slowdown in the second quarter. However, the technical definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And so we don't know if that's going to happen, but regardless, we know the second quarter is going to be quite painful. So if you look at this chart, what this shows on here is that the current, largest quarterly decline on record was basically post-World War II America. It looks like the record decline in GDP was in 1958, where we lost 10%. So there are some estimates. We might see GDP, which is gross domestic product, decline. These are some of the estimates between down 15 and down 40 on a worst case scenario. So it's pretty alarming, and that's why the stock market is spooked. That's why everyone's spooked, and that's also why there's going to be such a strong effort to combat this and put people's mind at ease. If you look at the top states with drastic measures in place, so this represents the states that represent the largest economic output as relative to the whole U.S. Obviously, California is the biggest, the largest, then Texas, then New York, then Florida, as would be expected. And then you can see the states that have the stay-in-place order, which obviously means it's going to have a larger impact on the economy when people are forced to stay in place. All right, let me skip through this one. And this is one's pretty remarkable to look at this chart. The one on the left is a little bit hard to actually make out. I had to read this several times to really make out what's on here, but it talked about what's going to happen with the labor market, or what level of unemployment are we going to see. And if you see here, this dotted yellow line shows the worst week we've ever had in terms of jobs being lost, which was down about 600,000 jobs. The consensus forecast right now is in excess of 1 million jobs lost. And we're seeing that, right, because restaurants are closing, they're having to lay off a mass amount of people. And so there are even economists that are projecting upwards of 3 million. And so that's why the stimulus response has to be so strong, because this is real. These are people that are not going to be able to pay their bills. This will be a huge strain on the economy, which is why there's going to be a massive stimulus, hopefully voted on soon. We're now March 24th. People's bills are going to start coming up April 1st. So I have confidence that we're going to get something in place prior to then. But if you've been watching any news, which has been hard to watch, you're seeing that the Republicans and Democrats are fighting, and some of the fighting's okay because you want to make sure they make good decisions. But they're also trying to make this bill massive and just throw all kinds of garbage in it, which I'm not a big fan of. They should deal with the current issue and not make this political and start putting in a bunch of policies that are going to, maybe they want to put in place for years down the road. Let's fix the issues today. And so you're also seeing here jobless claims, again, are likely to go to record highs. So, these are unprecedented times. We don't think this is permanent. It's definitely going to be temporary, but we don't know the impact of this. And so the one thing that we're seeing in a lot of the stimulus packages is how are we going to help small businesses? On the left-hand side, it shows up that small businesses make up a large part of employment. So total employment in the U.S., the small business share of that is 48%. So obviously that's very important. If you look over on the right-hand side, it says small businesses are fragile to lack of sales. And this basically measures how long would your business survive if sales stopped completely. And 21% said less than a month, and 34% said 1 to 3 months, which basically means that 55% of small businesses are basically in a race for survival. So that's why it's so critical we get money out in the business owners' hands so that these businesses don't fail, because as long as we keep things moving along, once the virus gets through the system and we start now getting back to work, if all the businesses are still there ready to function and we kind of help weather this storm, then there's going to be a lot, this will be more of a temporary disruption versus a more, dragged out, more permanent, destruction of jobs and financial hardship. And so this is why, obviously, all the Federal Reserve as well as Washington, they're really trying to make sure they protect small business owners and small businesses because of the impact on employment and obviously the impact on the economy. This is a fairly lengthy list. If you're curious to see this again, I'll be sharing this, but it's what we had an emergency declaration. Then the Federal Reserve basically unlocked the credit markets, which means that the market totally froze up. Getting access to cash was hard. Getting access, the bond market wasn't performing. The stock market obviously sold off. So the Federal Reserve basically put in place, by cutting rates to effectively to zero, put things in place to really help the economy move forward. What we're now starting to look at is some of the congressional responses. We had some governmental assistance initially. That was a fairly small package, about $8 billion. Then we had another package that went into place, which was round 2, which was free testing, paid sick leave, food assistance, unemployment assistance, expanded family and medical leave. healthcare worker protection. These were all things that were kind of necessary that, on a bipartisan basis, we got along and made decisions on. And so that got through the system. And the big one we're waiting on here is round 3. The fiscal stimulus is now going to be projected to be 1.6 to 1.8 trillion. I've even seen a number as high as 2.5 trillion, which is pretty amazing to see some of these numbers that are being thrown around. But the government gets it. They understand they have to throw money at this because this is a government-mandated shutdown of businesses and having people withdraw from society. So we have to support businesses, otherwise we'll have nothing to come back to. And so it's clear they're going to do everything in their power, and I know people are worried about how are we going to afford this. We can't afford not to do this. We have to put things in place. Now, we can all kind of probably sit around and have a conversation of, all right, well, how much should the individual support be? Should we be sending checks to individuals? And that's what some of the proposals are, maybe $1,200 per individual, $500 per dependent, looking at doing that on maybe a monthly basis, putting in small business and general economic support of $350 billion for small businesses, giving loans. And I think that's what they're trying to figure out is, as a small business owner myself, I don't need a grant. I don't need to get free money from the government, but it would be nice to just have capital available so that if I want to continue to operate, I can make sure payrolls aren't missed, and we don't have risk of that, but a lot of businesses do. So I think it's important to have things in place that small businesses can get some general economic support. We're definitely going to see relief for impacted industries. The airlines obviously are the top of mind. And how this is going to look, what this is going to look like will be really interesting because I know there's a lot of fighting still going on, trying to figure out what the end result will be. Hopefully, this will be in the form of a fair amount of low interest loans, or at least market rate loans where the government's not losing money, but at the same time, it's not just grants where now the taxpayers are having to pick up the full burden of this. And so that's something that we're seeing. And then you can see down here, credit facility, healthcare industry just needing to get money. So that's really kind of round 3. That seems to be what we're on the horizon for getting. And here's why they want to do it. I went through a scenario on the last few slides ago that talked about a slowdown in the economy. So if we do have this worst case slowdown of GDP of 40%, that means that $2 trillion would come out of the economy. So if we have a stimulus that's in the magnitude of 1.8 trillion, then that will limit the net, economic drawback because all this money will come into the system to basically kind of keep things moving forward. What was interesting, and I didn't realize this until I had kind of gone through this data, our fiscal response actually as a percentage of our economy is pretty healthy at 9%. The world is averaging 5%, but there are other countries that are throwing a lot more financial resources at this to make sure that we don't have these challenges and these challenges don't persist.
Don't feel like you have a cold?
No,
Are you sure?
Oh,
I want to listen to that.
Okay.
got somebody we got to
We'll
mute.
talk later.
Okay, I think I'm back. Sorry, we had some little bit of background noise. When we start looking at the volatility that we've all been dealing with, and it says that over the past 8 days, the S&P has experienced an average daily price move of greater than 7%. This is the most since the Great Depression. So you can see this volatility going back to the 20s, we're basically hit those same levels. And again, it was because it was downright panic because of the shutdown of so many businesses here. This also represents the amount of volatility that we saw is essentially at record highs. And so this is all real. We know how painful this is. We've all been living through this over the last 4 weeks. Again, this is why we're seeing so much stimulus thrown at this. The other thing that was really mind-blowing in terms of the severity and the quickness of this was the fastest decline of 30% that we've ever seen. And so this goes back to and really looks at 7 years, or excuse me, 7 periods in time where we had a decline of 30%, 1929, 1968, 1973, 87, 2000, 2007, and 2020, and it showed how long the decline took. So obviously right here and now, it took 22 days. So remarkable. And that's what I think was so shocking to everyone is as, this just unfolded and it just happened so quickly, so abruptly. Now, we can look at it one of two ways. Either, it's terrible that it happened so fast, or, it happened fast and let's have this get resolved and move forward. So this happened faster than during the Great Depression and the Great Recession that we just had. So again, we know this pain is real. As a financial advisor, I can look at this and say, you know what, it's 30%, we'll bounce back, but I do know that, we make money in dollars, we lose money in dollars, and so this has caused a lot of short-term pain for many of you, and so one of the things that we do know is we try to plan for, that's why we asset allocate. We don't know when these kind of things are going to arrive, but we do have confidence we'll make it out of this. We don't know how quickly things are going to bounce back. Are we going to have a V-shaped recovery? Is it going to take a little longer than we expect? That's unknown. And so as we wrap up, I do want to just I have another just quick little slide here. And so next Tuesday's webinar is going to be on March 31st, and actually we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. So we're actually going to provide an update on the stimulus. Hopefully by then we'll have some answers. Then we're going to talk a little bit more specifically on what we're doing for clients, rebalancing. We'll talk and what that means. We'll talk about some different planning and investment opportunities around potentially Roth IRA conversions, tax loss harvesting. Many of you make retirement plans, contributions to your IRAs, SEP IRAs, 401ks. Should you make them now? Should you consider funding things early for this year? So we'll go through that and provide some more specific planning ideas. And so I hope this was valuable. Thank you for joining me. And I always got to put up some different disclosures on here. So everyone have a great evening, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.